Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy. And today I'm here with Tom Atlee to talk about empathy. Thanks, Tom, for joining me for this dialogue.
I'm happy to be here, Edwin.
So I'll start off with giving a bit of an introduction of, got some material off your website, and it says that you're a social peace and environmental activist and author, and that you're co-director and research director of the Co-Intelligence Institute, a nonprofit organization that you founded in 1996, and there you're developing the concept of co-intelligence, in which you've written a lot about, and you're author of several books. One of them is Empowering Public Wisdom, and I think I don't have that one on screen here, but the other one is Reflections on Evolutionary Activism, and I can put that one up on the screen. Essays, poems, and prayers from an emerging field of sacred social change. And then is also The Tao of Democracy. And here we go, The Tao of Democracy, using co-intelligence to create a world that works for all. As well as, let me see if I can work this out here. You have a website, cointelligence.org, and if we put that up on the screen, here's the website. Anyone can go to it under co-intelligence.org, and you've got a blog where you do quite extensive writing at tomatleeblog.com. So there we go. Did that show up? Yeah, that's the blog. There's a blog, and here's the Co-Intelligence Institute website, where you have quite an extensive body of work on about co-intelligence. And yeah, so by way of introduction, is there more you'd like to say about just introducing yourselves? Anything I didn't catch there?
It's pretty clear that my focus for many years has been on the democracy, how to make a democracy that's wiser than what we got now. And I guess that's mostly it. And my activism has evolved from issue-oriented activism to transforming the system so that people collectively can solve their own problems and fulfill their own visions and stuff. They can be the democracy rather than passing on the democratic work to representatives.
Well, the reason I got interested in your work was you've recently started writing about empathy, and you actually you'd done quite a few articles or essays on empathy, and then you recently won the 2014 Empathetic Individualism Award from the Hawthorne Valley Center for Social Research. And let me just put that up real quick. So would you like to say something about that? This is the website, and what was that about?
Yeah, that's what kicked off my research on empathy, was being told I was going to get an award on it. It's sort of like, whoa, somebody has seen something interesting in my work. Curious and want to check that out fuller. Also, I have a number of friends, including you and Mickey Kashtan, for whom empathy is the central meme that they're working with. But that award was from a bunch of anthroposophists.
So, is there, by way of introduction, is there more you'd like to say about yourself?
Well, my activism on behalf of issues shifted with a watershed event in my life, the Great Peace March, 1986, cross country. I had experiences in self-organizing systems and in collective intelligence on that march, which I write about in my books, particularly The Tao of Democracy, which made me realize that communities and countries and groups could basically guide themselves intelligently and appropriately and wisely. And so I began to shift my activism from, let's elect this person or get this issue handled in this particular way, to increasing the capacity of groups and organizations and communities and countries to do their work better, and mostly focusing, as it becomes clear from my book, on helping the public generate the wisdom needed to guide their democracy. So that's been a focus of my work. I've done a lot of many other things around that, but that's the central thing that I talk about usually.
Well, recently you started writing about empathy and relating that to your work, and there was also you won an award recently from the it was the 2014. Let me see if I can present everybody. There we go. 2014 Empathetic Individualism Award recipient, and that was from the Hawthorne Valley Center for Social Research. And do you want to? And you were just saying that that's what got you really interested in really going deep. Since you won that award, you thought, oh, I better really dig in deeper. I'm winning an award on empathy. I better really dig into this.
Yeah, it's not a feature of my work and piece of my work that I featured particularly. So I was intrigued that this fellow who worked for the Hawthorne Valley Center for Social Research, that they have a community up there of anthroposophists, people who are followers of Rudolf Steiner in the Hawthorne Valley. There's 3 or 4 small communities that are largely anthroposophical folks in those towns, and they do. Steiner did a bunch of social innovations, from biodynamic gardening to the Waldorf schools, and their vision of better society has individuals who are self-actualizing and supported individuals acting in association with each other. And the dynamic tension between individualism and association was what this fellow had focused on. And he noted that in my work I had a political vision that involved people talking together. Conversation, dialogue, and deliberation are central to my work, and really hearing each other, and the diverse people hearing each other well and using the kinds of things they discover and the kinds of relationships that evolve out of that to solve their problems and pursue their aspirations, was what he focused on. That empathy would be required to do that. So he wanted me to spread the word to his community that there were political innovations and governmental innovations that could support the kinds of things that they were striving for. And so I spent a good chunk of last year, partly because I had to do this hour-and-a-half long speech that they asked me to do. So, okay, what am I going to say? Since and the speech is up on my website. A lot of thinking about how does empathy actually relate to my idea of co-intelligence, which is sort of intelligence as if wholeness and interconnectedness and co-creativity really mattered. They were really important. So what does that look like? That's the core concept in my work. So that's how that unfolded, and suddenly I find myself on your interview show.
Yeah. Hey, how did I end up here? What?
That's right.
Well, you've written quite a bit on empathy. Really, I mean, there's quite a few blog posts. You have that over an hour-long talk you gave, which is you've organized all your material on empathy. I see under the code-intelligence.org website under /empathy.html. So there's a whole page of links and to your essays and to your talk, and so anyone can find that either through that web page or through there'll be a link from this video there.
Yeah, but most of these essays were from last year and a little few from this year. If you look back over my work prior to 2014, you hardly see it mentioned at all, which is why I was so surprised when I was suddenly told I was being given an award for it. But it was very educational. I'm very happy I did it, and I've had long-time connections, particularly to people involved in the nonviolent communication world. Some of my best friends and colleagues, like Mickey Kashtan and John Abbey, are involved in that world. So I've been aware of that dynamic, although I have often spoken of it in terms of people being well heard and feeling well heard at many levels, their whole being understood and being companioned. That phenomena, which I've described in that kind of terms, I've spoken about for many years, but I never put it under empathy. And the closely related thing, which came up when I was working on my evolutionary activism book, is the compassion. There's a dynamic tension in trying to act on our internal impulses for empathy and compassion. Or I think of compassion as largely an active, it's a taking actions on our empathic responses. And if that's the only form of empathy that we're using, we can tend to have it dangerously narrow, to have it manifest in dangerously narrow ways. It's similar to intelligence, which you can be very smart in very narrow ways and not realize that using your intelligence, your smarts, is actually having broader negative impacts, even if you're being brilliant within a very narrow range. Like our industrial technological society is obviously brilliant, but it's creating impacts in the larger world that are, obviously problematic. And similarly, if we are empathic to to those who are close to us, those who we identify with, and not empathic to those who are not close to us and we don't identify with, we can create things like wars very easily, because we're trying to save our own at somebody else's expense, or push our own agenda at somebody else's expense, follow our own leader at somebody else's expense. And similarly with if we try to feed large populations so they don't go hungry, if we try to cure all diseases so nobody dies, trying to keep people alive forever at a tremendous expense, nature doesn't operate that way. Nature uses starvation and death and stuff to keep its balances. There's feedback loops that keep things from getting out of hand. And it's okay for us to exercise our empathy that way, but we have to expand it and take responsibility, like for population control, for reducing our footprints. We need to operate within nature's limits, nature's boundaries. And once we expand our empathy to include that, then it starts to be safer, and there starts to be a little less contradiction and dynamic tension in using our empathy. But that's a lot of what I wrote about and what I was trying to communicate to the people who gave me the award, because they're very much into empathy as a feeling and as a personal relationship. And I'm going, yes, it is that, and it's very important that it is that, and there's more going on there that we need to attend to, given the kind of power we've achieved as a civilization right now.
Well, what I'm looking at is how do we build what I call a culture of empathy. So it's empathizing with everyone, all humanity and nature for that matter. And I think that, and also fostering empathy between different people. So if there's different communities actually actively working at having empathy be a primary social value, which means that everyone empathize with everyone else too. So there's that level, so that's what I'm calling a culture of empathy, and maybe what you'd call big empathy, I think is the term you're using. And then also the empathy with future generations is what I think you're also addressing, right? That we have to put ourselves in the shoes or think about the needs of future generations as well, so kind of expand the empathy in that regard. So I think that's kind of how we might be overlapping in our understanding.
There's lots of overlap, and since I was around 12, I started having what I call daymares. There's these pictures of concentration camp victims from World War II, where you see these gaunt, sort of blank faces staring out from behind barbed wire as the American or Russian soldiers come. They found these people who were just wasted away, staring, and those images come to me, images like that, of future generations looking at me and us and going, what are you going to do? Our fate is like totally in your hands. And there's a personal relationship. I hadn't thought about this in an empathic sense, but I definitely have an empathic response to those images, similar to, you know, seeing pictures of starving children or walking by a, you know, a homeless person on the street, whatever. It rises up in me at a very personal level, and that's had a lot to do with my pretty persistent activism. Is I feel responsible to do something about that. And what does that entail? I mean, one of the things, in the three parts of big empathy, this phrase I came up with to describe what I wanted to talk about, part of it is expanding our empathy, as you have just spoken of, to reach more people, more of the other. Whenever we find ourselves othering someone, you know, or some kind of person, to recognize that that's an invitation to try and expand our empathic feelings, to embrace them also, and that's people who are different in culture, different in all the ways we habitually identify with, who are not part of our group, who are frowned upon by our group. That's one of the things. Yeah, you're showing the chart.
Yeah,
that
let me actually put it up there. That's the big empathy. Do you want to go over that, the different aspects of it?
Yeah, the expanded empathy is reaching out to more other people, and part of it also, probably the trickiest part, is empathizing with those who are on the receiving end of the things that we cause because we are part of the systems we're involved in. You know, an example that I have used is so much of the chocolate in the world is made by enslaved children in Africa, and it's like, you know, we don't even know that. You know, we pick up a bar of chocolate and eat it, and we think that's, you know, we're just enjoying some chocolate. And there's things like the organics movement and the fair trade movement, which try and deal with this. So if we focus on getting fair trade organic chocolate, we are minimizing our damage when we get it. But most people don't do that. But it's like trying, first of all, in this branch of the big empathy, to expand our sensibilities, to try and educate ourselves about the impacts of our actions, and to feel empathy for those who are on the receiving end of those impacts. So that's the expanded empathy part. Empathetic practice, empathic practice, is things like nonviolent communication, things like the guy who was in charge of the corrections department in, I think it was the state of Illinois or something like that, who had himself put in solitary confinement for several days so he could experience it. People who do a Zen, there's a Zen master in New York, I think it is, somewhere in the Northeast, who takes people out to experience homelessness, to live on the streets for several days. They take just so much money, you know, $5 or something, and then have to basically live during the day on that and find a place to sleep at night. There's ways to develop our empathic feelings and our empathic practice so that they're more part of our lives. And a lot of what you promote is that also, and you practice empathy in new and novel ways to encourage other people to do that. And the last one is probably the hardest thing for people to understand, which is embedding empathy into our systems. And this includes stuff that you suggest, like let's have training in empathy, you know, nonviolent communication, compassionate communication, etc., anti-bullying, whatever, in our grade schools and in, you know, all professions. You know, doctors should be trained in it, whatever. It's like, let's use the ability to feel and practice empathy. Let's make sure everybody has it. And that's an area where you cover too in your culture of empathy. And one other piece of it for me is looking at empathy. Empathy evolved as a feeling because it helped us work together. It helped us, you know, not do horrible things to each other. And
yeah. Well, we just had a crash, so we're starting a second video. So you had gone over the concept of big empathy in your model of the tree and different branches of the tree. The first branch was expanded empathy, so that's to expand our empathy from maybe just our in-group to a wider, to everyone, maybe to nature and to the future. Then you had empathic practice, which was different ways of personally expanding our empathy. And then you were going into embedded systemic empathy. So how does the cultural system foster or nurture empathy? So
one way that happens, which you cover well in your materials, is the idea of having empathy honored and people getting trained in feeling and exercising their empathy, and like in the first two branches. Another part that is less understood by people is that, empathy is there to help us create good effects with each other, to have good relationships, to do well together, to work together well, and that you can have the systems, the social systems themselves, the economic system, the political system, whatever, set up to make that happen or to hinder that. You look at our political system, and it is built for battle. It's not built for people co-creating and thinking well together about doing things. So if you set things up so that all kinds of different people can hear each other well, that's an example of setting up a system whereby through people hearing each other well, they're able to create good, wise public policy and public initiatives and work together well as communities. So that's a way where people may or may not feel empathetic to people who are affected by policies that were made by an empathetic group. May or may not feel empathetic, but they're living in a system where the system itself manifests the empathy. So these are various ways of embedding it into the systems.
Yeah, and that's the area you've really worked on extensively, is how do you embed it into the social and into the political system? How do you get everyone's voice to be heard and have social structures that allow people's voice to be heard? There's another one that I think of is like the justice system. Like, just as the political system is set up as competition, our justice system is the same structure. It's something happens, you go to court, you hire these gladiators that are called lawyers. They go battle it out, and somehow through this individualism, this battling it out, that somehow the truth is going to be known, and the loser is punished, or there's sort of this retribution if it's a kind of a criminal kind of a situation. So the whole structure is very low in empathy, and there's like movements like the restorative justice movement, which is trying to move towards a more empathic, dialogic, everybody being heard and really working it out. I would actually move it to a restorative empathy terminology, as a terminology which nobody uses except for me, kind of approach, to be clear that we're, it's about having an empathic relationship, and if something happens, we're going to restore that empathic relationship. So that's just one structure, and then you're talking about this political structure as well, and I think we can pretty much go through every social institution that kind of needs that sort of a transformation.
Yeah, there's an underlying principle, at least in nonviolent communication, I think in a lot of empathic practices, that what you're doing is making sure that everybody's needs are getting met. And what does that involve? We're so used to thinking, people, New Agey people talk about scarcity mentality. There's not enough to go around to meet everybody's needs. And there's a funny way in which that doesn't look at how many of our needs are not even material. It's like there's infinite amounts of love and pleasure and joy and things that can be multiplied forever without any limit, that we can help each other have. So it feels like that is a very interesting principle to use to just hold up against some aspect of our society. Is this about somebody getting somebody getting their needs met and not somebody else? Is part of the system getting its needs met, or is everybody involved getting their needs met? And it's scary for a lot of people in the competitive society to even think of this. If you talk about meeting somebody's needs, they're going to instantly think, well, that's going to be at my expense. You know, if you're going to be helping the homeless people, you're going to have to raise taxes on me. You know, it's like there's the sense that you could actually get together and explore the situation and come up with something where everybody involved is better off, is alien to the vast majority of people in our competitive societies. It wasn't so alien to indigenous and, you know, small village culture kind of societies, but it's definitely alien to us, and that's part of what you and I in our work are trying to help people get, that not only is this a good idea as a theory, but there's tons of practice that can help us, and tons of institutions, most of which are very nascent experimental things that could be used to make this the way we actually run our society.
Well, an example of that is Barack Obama, when he had his choice for to nominate his first Supreme Court nominee, and he went through a list of capacities that the nominee needed, you know, intelligence, you know, expertise, and then he said, and also empathy was one of the qualities that his nominee would need. And Republicans, conservatives just went, you know, crazy about it for almost 2 weeks on Fox News. It was like how horrible empathy was, and I think it was. What was his name? Glenn Beck was saying empathic fascism is coming our way. We have to get our guns. But one of the big arguments was that it would be the justice, that this was like code word for the judge giving empathy to the down and out versus to them. So they would give like a favorable empathy. And so that was, I think, kind of what the fear was, and it was like just a misunderstanding that a really empathic culture is that they would be heard, that all sides would be heard, and all sides would hear each other as well. So I think it was you're just kind of building on what you're saying, that people have some fear about that they think it's empathy for one side or the other, and they're going to be disadvantaged, right. And they don't realize it's really empathy for everyone and between everyone. And so I feel if there was more of an understanding around that it'd be a lot more. I mean, I've seen it in my family, which is very conservative, that they start realizing, hey, it's empathy for everyone. This works really good. So I'm actually very hopeful that, you know, if conservatives and progressives see that they could actually work together.
Right, and I think part of that's it's not so much personal as cultural. That's part of what's attractive by your culture of empathy. We are embedded in the stories and systems of our culture, and that's we extract a lot of meaning in that. Our sense of what's possible and what's real comes out of our culture and the experiences we've had with other people who are embedded in the culture. And for most of the people who are complaining of this, of the idea of empathy, they haven't experienced empathy, where there's a lot of the do-gooder, you know, philanthropist, love your neighbor energy, where somebody's getting benefited at somebody else's expense. You know, we're doing good by one side, not the other side. That is what they're reacting to. But the sense of actual exploratory conversations where everybody is actually looking to what will serve the needs and interests and life of each other, or of the larger whole they're part of, those kinds of conversations are so rare. So there's a way in which I can empathize with the people who are against empathy, you know, some of whom are using it for its manipulative power. You know, the people on Fox News, you know, I don't know, they may have experienced empathy in their life, but they're not about to say that, you know, because they're getting power within the competitive system by playing off of people's fears that they're not going to get their needs met. But we have not, it feels like those of us who believe in the power of empathy have a job ahead of us of providing people with examples, and to not just say, here's an example, but say, look at how this works. You know, one of my favorite things that I talk about is this initiative that was done in Canada in 1991, where Macqueen's magazine, it's like the Time magazine, the glossy News Weekly of Canada, picked 12 people who represented the diversity of a deeply divided country. You know, Quebec wanted to secede, and indigenous people were going, hey, we were here first, we want respect, we want to give our gifts, and we're being sidelined and oppressed, and actually culture being destroyed. So there's lots of tension within the culture in Canada, and they picked these people to be as diverse as they possibly could. I often talk about random selection. This was not random selection. This was scientifically choosing people who represented all different kinds of diversity. And then they turn these folks over for 3 days to Roger Fisher, who was a author of a breakthrough book called Getting to Yes, co-author, about negotiating so that everybody's legitimate interests were being cared for. And they brought them up from Harvard and said, okay, see what you can do with these folks. And it was fascinating. What was most fascinating to me, because I've seen lots of examples of this stuff working, but I've never seen media coverage of it the way McQueen's did. They had 40 pages of coverage, which is unheard of. I mean, where do you get 40 pages of coverage of anything in glossy Newsweekly magazines? And they did bios. They had half-page bios of each of the participants at the beginning, so the readers could say, oh, this guy's like me, the natural empathy they have for this guy, and then the natural antipathy they have for these other folks that are not like them. And, so they're kind of set up to enter into this conversation that these folks are going to have. And then they give page after page after page with pictures and, what happened on this day and this hour, who said what, and you see the sort of stiff body language at the beginning, and then it deteriorates. The people are actually, their body language shows that they're not really listening. They're actually hating each other. You're going, oh my God, this is gonna totally break up. And it's remarkable how it did develop. I won't go into that right now, but at the end, you have everybody hugging each other. These people who are opponents, you have these pictures of people hugging each other, and you have been dragged through this process. You have watched it come apart, and you have watched it come together. And there was also a Canadian TV, a CTV documentary about this, public affairs show, for an hour long that had a similar kind of pattern. And you're basically giving an entire country of millions of people a vicarious experience of what a powerful dialogue to resolve everybody's concerns, is like. And similarly, there's a number of other processes. There's a process called the Wisdom Council, where you randomly select a dozen or so people and from a community and say, so what would you like to talk about? And they come up with their ideas, and they basically, the facilitator models being a good listener, and reflecting, saying, am I getting this right? And getting the emotional content as well as the substance of what they're trying to say, and putting it up on chart pads, and people are one by one, they're feeling really well heard over and over again. And whenever somebody interrupts somebody else, with some angry, that's a really stupid idea, and the facilitator will go, give it to me, what's your concern? And it's just taking this disruptive energy, translating it as a concern, which is a perfectly okay thing to have, and hearing that person. And as it all unfolds, people end up being all together, kind of opened up and willing and interested in hearing each other and looking at the larger picture that they're all embedded in and coming up with something. And they're blown away at the end of these. The participants are just, they've never experienced anything like this before. Mm-hmm. And you have a public meeting, and they're coming to the public meeting saying, we're so different, and this was the most amazing thing that ever happened to us. And that's an infectious thing. And if you can put that on media so that, millions of people, thousands of people, whatever, can experience that, then you begin to erode this assumption that, people who are different can't talk to each other. They can't hear each other. They'll never come to any kind of agreements. So contradicting that and providing good examples that are very visible and engaging and compelling. And there's many ways we could do that, and we're doing some of them now. But it's sort of up to us to get bright about how to do that, because most people have never experienced anything like what we're talking about, and that's really sad. And they're not going to climb on the bandwagon until they know it's not going to fall apart as soon as they step on it.
Well, there's the methods and the processes. There's so many out there now, that, and I've seen them manifest, and you're talking about them seeing them manifest, and so the tools seem to be there. The experience seems to be there. For me, it's about how do we build a movement to do that. And naturally, I grew up conservative, evangelical fundamentalist, and through my travels, I started, seeing kind of the common humanity of people, and really seeing that's the underlying values that's important, and then exploring different values. I came across empathy and really saw that it was empathy that brought people together, and so I kind of moved more into the progressive world. But I'm finding that progressives aren't all that empathic either, in a sense. And you've been an activist in the progressive world. I guess I don't know if that's a fair statement, but and you've done marches and social activism, and there seems to be a block between progressives moving into the fostering empathy, having that vision of an empathic world, and a couple of blocks that I'm just curious what you think about is, one is like the work of George Lakoff. I don't know if you've seen his work on linguistics, where he talks about Enlightenment reasoning, and all the progressives believe in Enlightenment reasoning, and that all the premises of Enlightenment reasoning are actually inaccurate. One being that we're all individuals, individual beings going for our self-interest, whereas the neuroscience actually shows that, through mirror neurons, we're totally in relationship all the time, whether we pretty much like it or not. We can kind of try blocking that relationship. So he lays out that and he's saying that progressives don't know their own values of connection and empathy. And then there's a book I just read and have interviewed Lori Gruen, where she contrasts an ethics of justice and an ethics of empathy, and basically that the primary, the social activism of progressives is around this social justice, and the social justice is very much around that, we're individuals, we got to kind of equalize our, self-interest, and it's this process of self-interest again. So it very much mirrors the work of George Lakoff, versus, and she's saying we need an ethics of empathy, which is focusing on the quality of our relationships. But so I guess what I'm kind of just bringing that up for, that I even see progressives is not all that empathic, for that matter, that if you look at MSNBC and Fox News, they're kind of like mirror images a bit of each other. So I'm kind of even leaving kind of the notion of being, progressive, thinking we need like a third movement, like the empathy movement. Just as when we have like a dysfunctional family, the parents' family, they're like bickering with each other and fighting. It's like they can't even get out of their conflict. They need like a third party that's like an empathy party, like a mediator that can say, okay, I'm going to listen to you as a progressive and your, pain and your needs, to the Republicans, listen to their pain and their needs, and then bring them together and kind of be like mediators between them. So just wondering what you kind of think of all that.
That's a very interesting idea, the idea of a movement that is in what Arnie Mindell calls the third position. I watched in one of Arnie Mindell's workshops, I watched a black woman and a white woman who had been friends, and then the white woman had felt her kid was endangered and she'd moved out of the neighborhood that was mostly black. And the black woman was upset with her because, yeah, she has the privilege to move out, and the black woman didn't, blah, blah, blah. And they were at each other's throats, kind of. And Arnie had them stand facing each other, talking to each other, and then he'd step into, he'd say, just a minute, you come into the position that I'm in, and I'm going to move into yours, and I'm going to speak for you. She gets in and is saying what the black woman was saying, and then goes in, does the same thing the other way, and it's like showing that you're really heard and your energy is being represented. And that's similar to, in dynamic facilitation, the facilitator is what's called the designated listener. The facilitator is trained to be able to do quality reflective listening and really companion somebody in their perspective during the time that they're being listened to. And the idea of And a mediator will sometimes do that. Good mediators will do that, but it's not necessarily intrinsic to mediation. Mediation will often be trying to solve the problem rather than engaging people and really hearing each other. But that third position or designated listener role, imagining that being taken on by a whole movement collectively, is a really interesting idea. And there's a funny way in which I wonder, and we don't know. You'd have to do some kind of marketing. Might as well use the marketing for something good. It's like, does the word empathy, is that the best word to have in the front lines? It's descriptive. There's no question about that. But whether listening or something else might be, or all voices heard. I don't know what the word or phrase would be that should be at the leading edge of such a movement. But I had a very discouraging experience with my last book, where the people in some of my most close colleagues, it turned out, didn't get what I was talking about when I said public wisdom. I have this book called Empowering Public Wisdom, which is totally descriptive from my perspective. And then I had a bookstore event where I asked people what they thought the word public meant. What came to mind when they heard public, and what came to mind when they heard wisdom, and then what came to mind when they heard the phrase public wisdom. And I learned that the book title doesn't communicate. It expresses perfectly what I'm talking about, but it doesn't communicate. People at the other end don't end up thinking what I'm thinking. So they don't even bother with the book. It doesn't mean anything to them. And it's just like, whoa. And I haven't really figured out a way around that. But I would say if you wanted to create a movement that was based on empathy, you'd have to find out how people are responding to the word empathy. And I think people may be carrying some problematic connotations with that word that would keep them from joining in or being receptive to the idea. But I love the idea. I mean, the idea you've described, when I extend what I've seen in small groups, the nonviolent communication, dynamic facilitation, these efforts where empathic practice is central, and watched how powerfully they are when that third role, that third place is held by somebody well, and then imagine that at a collective level going on between all the various adversarial entities there are, with an invitation to join in. You can do this too. It's like, wow, what an interesting vision. I like it.
Well, that's the vision that I'm operating under, and I like the word empathy because it's the most descriptive and of, like you're saying, and there are plenty of kind of criticisms that people have of it, but a lot of it I see is like misunderstandings. And there's a huge body of work, like all those books in the background. Every one of those is about empathy.
Yes, part of one of the humbling things about us as authors and book lovers, I learned when I was first, 12 years ago when I put out my first book, The Tao of Democracy. I learned 3,000 books a day are published, and it's like you can have a massive library that is pretty irrelevant on the larger scheme. So I go, you're absolutely right. It's the perfect word for expressing what you're talking about. I'm just saying there's another part, how do you frame it? How do you communicate it?
Oh, right.
Those people you're trying to reach. These people hate each other. They're feeling the scarcity of things, and you come and you say, let's all be empathetic, and it's like, well, screw you. It's like I'm not going to be a loser like you are. It's like, I'm going to fight and I'm going to win. That's what I feel the progressives. They're caught in a system where if you have two, it's like what I realized about 8 or 10 years ago, the majoritarian system, majoritarian winner-take-all system. If you have two options, there's a good chance somebody's going to be able to get, a majority. If you have three options, the chances of getting a majority drop really precipitously. If you have four options, it gets worse and worse. And the fact is, nothing really boils down to two options, ever, But the system pushes us into that. I vote for people I don't fully agree with because in the system, I have to or I waste my vote. It's like the system creates situations where if people are going to be empathetic, they're going to lose out. You know, the CEO that is suddenly empathetic about the people who are being caused cancer by what he's producing and tries to change the company, but it's more expensive, and the board members throw him out because they want somebody who's going to get them profit. You know, it's like it's hard in our system to practice empathy. And you watch what happened. You know, there's Obama is trying to be empathetic supposedly with the Republicans, and it's just the system is not set up to receive that. So, but there may be, when you say the word empathy, I can easily imagine people, the picture they get in their heads is loser. You're going to be the bleeding heart. You're going to be giving up something or making other people give up something in order to benefit somebody else. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep fighting because this is the soldier, the warrior model. I'm going to do the good thing. And most people even think, like, they look at Gandhi and King as winners, you know, especially Gandhi. It's like King was more, he was more going for what he was getting. Gandhi had this funny thing of he was willing to lose in a surface way in order to win. I mean, he would support his opponents, you know. He ended up getting people to volunteer for the Boer War in South Africa, you know, and when his opponents were in a weak position, he would step back. He wouldn't push. He's going, I want to be in a conversation with you as a peer to find what's the truth of this. And that's what is true and what will meet everybody's needs. And if you won't be in that conversation with me, then I'll shut down your operations. So you're forced to treat me as a peer, but I'm not trying to dominate you. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to have this conversation where we figure out together what makes sense here. And that is such an alien concept. The British certainly didn't get it for many years, you know. So I hadn't thought about this till this conversation, but in terms of actually wanting to have a movement, I think you'd have to figure out, here's 30 different ways to talk about what you're trying to talk about, and then give it, at least try it out on, you know, 30 different progressives and 30 different, you know, conservatives, and see what they say in response to these things. There's a kind of survey that I heard of once called a Really Find Out survey for surveying people on something that they don't know nothing about. And you pick the things that you know can be provided by whatever it is you're trying to get them interested in, like empathy, and you create a bunch of phrases that describe these are things that you can have if you do this. These are things you can experience. And then you ask them to look over the list and mark which ones are vital, which ones are good but not vital, and which ones they don't want or unwanted. And you're totally surprised that there's some of the things on the list considered totally vital by practically everybody, and some of the things on the list, there's a significant, you know, 15, 20%, even though they're all good things, where for whatever reason people say, I don't want that. And you go, okay, we're not going to talk about it using those phrases. You know, the marketing people, that's a very simple level of marketing, the kind of marketing they have now. And they put electrodes on people's heads and watch what their brainwaves do when they see images and read phrases, which of course is beyond our scope at the moment. But
yeah, I'm all for using marketing, using all the marketing techniques to promote and, I guess, in a way, sell empathy. You know, it seems like it would be an easy sell, but who knows?
Yeah, well, the fact it isn't, and we need to be empathetic to the people who we're trying to sell empathy to. It's like, what's going on for them when we say empathy? And there's a funny way in which you could frame the marketing as an exercise in empathy. You know, and you might, in one of these times when you have the impulse to create your empathy center in a movement or a demonstration or something, you might instead engage people in a conversation like this, individually and on the side, spend several hours going around the crowd and saying, when you look at this list, what stands out as being really super important, and what stands out as yuck? That's a sort of grassrootsy way of doing a survey like that. And then you go to the passersby who are watching this, or you go to the people who are screaming at them from across the street and say, you know, I'm glad you guys are here. I'm just wondering if you look at this list for me and tell me which you think are really important, which you think are yuck, you know, and just see, just as a, you know, it's like a straw poll, straw votes. Just see, is anything stand out? You know, you don't have to have highly paid surveyors and focus groups to. Ultimately, you should in order to do it really well. But this is, I think you discover some interesting things about it. And my impulse, I think about my own responses to the word empathy, and the fact that I went so long without using that phrase is an interesting indicative. You know, once I got into it, I go, yeah, this, and I distinguish it from compassion. You know, I start to get a nuanced sense of what this means. But I didn't start out that way, even though I was very familiar with practices that used it. But like, I think getting everybody's needs met, and everybody being fully heard, those two phrases are, for me, much more powerful than empathy. And empathy, they turn me on, and it gets me really excited. I have no idea if other people have that response, but I'm just looking at my own responses. But the vision, I still, you know, my mind salivates over your vision.
Yeah, there is. I kind of salivate over it too, so I'm investing all my time and energy into this vision. There is a process. Actually, it sent you the link for human-centered design or empathic design or design thinking. And I think that movement is doing the most for popularizing empathy at the moment. I mean, you talk about NBC and so forth, and there's plenty of others. But the human-centered design is a process that comes out of, really design community. All these design schools, all around the country, they are training people to design initially products, physical things. And kind of having a methodology for designing that, but that process is moving into processes, systems, and even into cultures. And in that design process, the idea is that if you design anything, you need to empathize with the people you're designing for and find what their needs are. And then having a methodology of finding their needs, creating solutions and prototypes for it, and then actually taking those prototypes and going back and testing those prototypes with the people you're designing for, and empathizing with them about how the prototype lands. So it's kind of like I call it empathic design, because you're always in an empathic space. You're listening to people, what their needs are. You're going into creating some kind of a solution for them, but you're holding their needs in your experience as you're designing. And then once you create some prototypes, you're actually going and empathizing a bit more deeper, because you're kind of like thinking through showing and doing. And it's an iterative process. So you just keep going through this basic process, and there's a huge amount of tools that the design community has for doing this. So the empathy is actually talked about a lot in all of these tech startups. They're using this process. Google, which I know that you don't like Google, but they actually use this. They're moving towards using this as their corporate culture, human-centered design, as their culture, and companies like Apple do some of that too, and others. So anyway, that's a process that I'm really excited about.
I wonder what would happen if you Google the term participatory design, because I've known that the language of participation I've seen a lot in the design community, like in architecture, charrettes and stuff, where they go out to the community. We're going to create these buildings or this park or whatever, and they spend several days with people working over designs from that. And I'm curious, what is the other language that's being used that's covering that same kind of ground.
Oh, uh-huh.
Where it might you've picked one of the branches of this that comes closest to your sensibilities and like that best. And I go, are there other people who are doing fundamentally the same kind of work, but are using different language? And are there other waves to ride as well as the one that you've found with human-centered design? The other thing that comes to mind is as you're talking, I realize that the connection between needs and empathy is an unusual one. I have not seen that outside of NVC, nonviolent communication. What empathy brings up is feelings. You know, you are there with a person's feelings. The pathos is the feeling or the suffering, you know, and you want to be there with somebody as they're feeling what they're feeling. NVC is remarkable in that it goes underneath the feelings into the needs that are being met or not met that generate those feelings. But most empathic responses don't have that. And I think a lot of people think that empathy is closer to sympathy. You know, it's feeling what somebody else is feeling and wanting them to not feel so bad. You know, and sort of being company so that they won't feel alone. And all that's fine and good, but it's not. It doesn't have the this juicy, substantive connotation that you and I have when we think of it, and we think needs is what we automatically connect. But I'm thinking that maybe that's not true for the vast majority of people, and that's why they don't respond to this. We're talking about actually getting people's needs met. We're not talking about empathy.
Yeah. Well, it is in the sense that I know I've talked to like Mickey Koshta, interviewed her, and you know, she's kind of saying, you know, all needs are kind of equal in the sense. For me, empathy is like a super need because it's like a gateway to other needs. If you don't have empathy, you can't really get to other needs. So it's like a prerequisite for any kind of a needs finding, as well as human-centered design is pretty explicit about needs as well. That it is about finding people's needs and designing solutions to address those needs. So there's quite a bit of overlap I see between the needs finding of NVC and human-centered design.
Yes, that's true. I'm sort of touching base with our earlier conversation about an empathy movement. And looking at, you know, why people don't respond when it's so obvious they should. You know, if everybody thought that empathy was about everybody getting their needs met, I think you'd have a whole different response. And the fact that they don't indicates that they're thinking of something else. And that's another kind of survey you could do, is just go out in the street and say, when I say empathy, what do you think of? And see what people say. You know, and you might find what I found at my book signing thing, where people are thinking something remarkably different from what you're thinking of, and have that direct your, you know.
Yeah, we have a vision of what empathy means, and we've seen it, and other people have like a whole different connotation. It means something totally sympathy. It might be like feeling, it might be confusing it with sympathy, and it's about feeling sorry, and I don't want to get into feeling sorry for people. Or it's about code word for in-group, you know, caring about your in-group or something. So like, got all these different connotations.
I would actually bet if you went out with a survey that had, you know, that says, what does empathy mean to you? I would bet that feelings came up way more than needs. I would bet like $50 or something that would be true, and that is, you know, it's like public. When I talk about public wisdom, people think public is that it's accessible to everybody. You know, this is a public website. You know, they don't think that this is everybody's involved. They didn't think that. And wisdom is, you know, you look at the Bible and, you know, Socrates, this is wisdom. This idea that people actually create that or have it in themselves is not what they were thinking. So public wisdom is people being able to go read the Bible and Socrates. I'm going, no, that's not what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter what it means to me if I want to promote it in the world, you know. And that's a that's a hot thing in your
Yeah.
vision.
It's also maybe it's part of the job is to educate people about the meanings. I
Yeah.
had mentioned George Lakoff a couple of times. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a linguist. So he's
Yeah.
really looking at language, and he's saying there's a conservative worldview, based on dominance and hierarchy, and that there's a whole language that revolves around that. And there's a language with progressives, for example, and you're trying to kind of control and manipulate the language to uh,
Mhm.
express what it is that you're wanting to express. And if you can kind of inhibit others from expressing themselves through the language, you kind of like control the language. Just simple things like calling people who come from Mexico either illegal aliens or just undocumented workers, right?
Uh-huh.
Illegal. These people are illegal versus they just don't have, they're illegal human beings.
Right.
And he's got a whole book on who's freedom. So it goes under the under the understanding of what does freedom mean. There's the freedom from or the freedom to do, and the progressives have one vision of freedom, and conservatives have another, and they kind of control the language. So it's really important, the definitions and how people use the words and what they've associated with those. And there might be there's a real need to have a vocabulary to even speak about what we're talking about. And if we don't have those words and understandings, it really makes communication difficult.
Yeah. And trying to decide, in any given effort to focus your efforts and attention, to what extent are you trying to teach the language, and to what extent are you trying to open a door that people can walk through because they recognize instantly what you're talking about. I talk about co-intelligence, and it's one of the things I do when I give speeches. Is I say to people, how many here have seen co-intelligence before? Or no, I say, how many people know what co-intelligence is? And they'll look at me kind of blankly. And I say, how many people know what co-stupidity is? And they do what you do. They laugh. And I say, isn't it interesting that you've never heard either term before, and you don't know what co-intelligence is, and you know what co-stupidity is? What does that say about our culture? And it's a funny introductory way into a world that they've never particularly thought about before.
Well,
So
something they,
I'm.
sorry,
Hmm?
go ahead. Oh, I
I'm
was just going to, go ahead.
there's a dynamic tension between getting people to think differently and to use different language, and welcoming them in to participate in whatever activities are going on in that topic. And it's like, is it important for people to use the language of empathy to describe what they're doing when they are listening and making sure people's needs are getting met? It's like, is that an important entryway? And it can be argued either way.
Mm-hmm.
If people end up doing that without having language that they all agree on describes it, you're limited in what kind of impact you ultimately are going to have. But the same goes the other way. If you require that people understand empathy and respond to the word empathy before they'll engage in what you call empathic actions, then you're going to limit how many people come in. So there's this dance, and ideally these issues would be discussed among people who are all very decisive about wanting and committed to creating a culture of empathy, or this kind of culture that's called a culture of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, so we have things we need to do to get people involved in doing things, and we also want to shape the language. So how are we going to do both of those in ways that don't get in each other's way? That's an inquiry that's worth having.
A lot of the people I've interviewed who have gone on, like with NBC, or gone on to teach these processes, a lot of them have told me that I was in a workshop and I was heard a way I'd never been heard before.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt so good that I just wanted to do this more. So that's the experiential. If we can create a sense of the experience of it, that's really what has set so many people kind of on this course. And I want to spend the rest of my life doing it because this is so good, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that if you had to center anywhere, providing people with either real or vicarious experiences of empathy so that they identify with that and want to either have that or see more of it, that's beyond the language. You can then say, what happened there or what's happening here, we call empathy, and we'll be using that word to describe that, you know. But it's if they first come to the word, they may not be attracted to the experience. If they first come to the experience, they'll take whatever hook you're giving them to be able to get the experience.
Focus on the experience.
Once you got them addicted.
Well, I did want to mention one thing in terms of your co-intelligence, that with human-centered design, it came out of the design community, and it was initially, I think it was more of a, we're the designers, we're the experts, we're going to go design this. And that there's a movement towards moving from the products, as I was saying, to moving to systems and processes and even the culture. And the design also, there's a co-design community in the sense that we're more like facilitators in the community, and we're going to facilitate a co-design using these tools out of the design community so the community can design together solutions. And I think that very much overlaps with what you're talking about, as well as like dynamic facilitation and so forth, where it's not some experts, distant experts, but that they're really coming into the community and working and helping to kind of facilitate a more empathic or co-empathic design.
Right. As you could say, well, how do we want to design our futures as communities? How do we want to design the way we address problem X, you know, and the engagement of people, not just their participation, but their participation in ways that generate wise outcomes. You know, that's a lot of my work is in that. And to me, it's very hard to have wisdom without empathy, to actually have wise outcomes. I can imagine it, and again, if empathy is seeing everybody's needs are met and everybody's well heard, you can do that without the feeling of empathy. That can be a rational act if that's what you're trying to do. But it's, of course, tremendously helped by actually feeling empathetic. But you can actually have an activity which is about making sure everybody's needs are met. And in order to do that, you have to find out what their needs are. There's a funny way in which marketing and scientific PR is meeting real needs in sort of artificial ways. People do have needs for belonging and do have needs for sex and do have needs for food. So you're taking those and you are listening to people by doing your marketing research, getting inside their heads. You know, whether you're doing it with any feeling in your heart about it is a whole other thing. But you can get inside their heads and inside their hearts and provide them with things that make them feel like they're getting those things met. And sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. You know, does this car actually serve your needs for sex? Yeah, there's a guy, economist in Chile, Manfred Max Neef, who talks about social systems and the economic systems and the ways they address people's needs. And do they actually fulfill the needs in the way that satisfy them, or do they like tease them? And the whole addiction response. Here's something that will give you a feeling like you're getting some need met, but then it goes away, and the only way you can try to get it again is by doing that thing again. And that's fundamental to the consumer society. You want people to keep buying things, keep buying services, keep going over and over and over, rather than being deeply satisfied people. And it's a very interesting analysis.
Yeah, very much so. I'm really that brings up a lot. That's really, because it's making those associations. If people are needing empathy, care, and love, and then the marketing is associating this product with that empathy, care, and love, and then you get the product because you think you're going to get that, and then you don't get it, well, then you need more of that product, you know? And it's like this constant search, I mean, constant trying to get it through this, and you don't get it, and you just get more and more depressed.
And that's interesting because a lot of people are kind of feeling that, and like I was watching the Super Bowl, and I've been watching some games of, just far from empathic activity, watching some basketball games, and the advertising that's coming up is really interesting. Coke, they have a Coca-Cola, this guy, something happens to this guy on the beach, and somebody gives him a Coke to make him feel better, and he's about to sip it, and then he sees the woman who is just, her guitar strings broke, and she's upset, and he goes and gives her the Coke, and she's about to sip it, and then somebody is, his little booth is smashed, and they go over and give him. Then nobody ever actually drinks the Coke, but they're passing on and helping each other. You know? And it says, open up happiness is the motto for Coke, and it's like, and there's an empathy thing. They're feeling for somebody, and they're tying their product to that thing and to being generous and all that. It's like, whoa, is that too much? And all sorts of products that are tied to being a good father, in these sports things where people are coming on, and fatherhood, which is, a lot of conservatives have a big deal about family and the quality of being a good father, and liberals too. It's like it's fascinating what's happening in advertising. The advertising may have absolutely nothing to do with the product, but it's tapping into these longings that people have, which then don't get really satisfied because they don't need that product to satisfy that need.
Yeah, what in talking with you, it's really brought in the media aspect of it. That's something that's kind of becoming very much alive in me in terms of how to bring this into the media. And it seems like there could be advertising for empathy that is empathic. So the empathy is kind of like the product in the sense that we have that story, but instead of saying Coke is the answer, we say empathy. The empathy movement is the solution, right? It's like, and then you actually experience it, and it's like, hey, this is really good. So,
yeah, and there is the idea of modeling, of role models, of what I call Imagineering stories, which are stories that when you read them or you see them or you contact them in some way, you realize that you could walk into that story. You could live that story. The book, The Monkey Wrench Gang, which is about a bunch of rednecks that really love their place, and they don't like the earth-moving equipment coming in and messing with it. They don't like all the billboards there, and they burn down the billboards, and it describes them going in at night to the earth-moving equipment and putting Karo syrup in the engines, which destroys the engines when it gets turned on. It's like, this is monkey wrenching, and this story became one of the forces in creating Earth First. It's like people read this story, and it had all the narrative and the motivations and the technology that you need. It was all built into the story. The Free Hugs campaign, you're probably more aware of that. This guy who went out in a mall with a sign that said Free Hugs, and everybody ignored him, and then one little old lady comes and hugs him, and suddenly the video's in color, and other people start hugging him, and then he's passing out signs to other people, and everybody's walking around with free hug signs, and then the mall guard or some cop comes over and says, no, you can't do that here, and they start a petition, and they show them passing. This is like 8-minute video or something. Show them passing the petition around, and the numbers going higher and higher, 100, 700, blah, blah, get up to 10,000, and they present their petition to this guard, and he goes, okay, you can do your free hugs. And this video went viral, and there's all people over the world that are walking around with signs that say free hugs in their language and hugging each other and videoing each other doing this, and there's a website. It's like the idea that you can have a story that is told in a novel or is shown in a movie, or the what was it, the soap operas, these women in these in Jamaica or something that watched soap operas all the time, all day long, or listened to them on the radio, and there was a lot of abuse, spousal abuse, and they did modeling of how to deal with spousal abuse in creative ways in the soap operas, and the amount of spousal abuse went way down. It's like the ability to model certain behaviors and see the outcomes that are in that, and have that in the media, you know, which can be in an advertisement, it can be in a soap opera, it can be a movie, a novel, whatever. So I like to think that we could do a lot more of that, and having video people out there while you're doing your thing, having some young people who do videos all the time, videoing you doing your thing, and have a video. I mean, you're doing video interviews, but having videos of actual empathy at work, in the field somehow, being on a YouTube channel, I don't know.
Yeah, one of those ideas that I had similar to what you're talking about is there's this program called Super Nanny, and she goes into these dysfunctional families. Have you seen that one?
No, I've seen ones about a restaurant where the guy goes into dysfunctional restaurants and whips them into shape. But you were telling me about Super Nanny earlier, so go ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of more of a tough love, but having a model, something like that, where you go into super, I don't know what they call, like super empathy nanny or something, where it's actually using all these processes, empathy building processes within a family, so you could actually see that transformation happen. So that would be...
Yeah, and people... It's interesting for families because it's like there's a whole branch of nonviolent communication that is dealing with how to raise your kid with nonviolent communication, how to actually do things that get their needs met while your needs are getting met, which is, if you can actually demonstrate that, that's a big market.
Mm-hmm.
You know, parents are desperate they're trying to meet their kids' needs, and their needs are being eroded all over the place. You know, and they feel they have to discipline their kids, you know, so their kids can get out in the rough and tumble world, regardless of what their needs are. I mean, it's all sorts of problems being a parent, you know, and I think that's a very good entry point. And theoretically, it should be easy to model some of those ways of behaving with different age kids, and have people try and do that. And joint support groups. We're watching this soap opera, and we're going to become a part of a group of people who are trying to live like they live in this soap opera.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been a great conversation. I don't want to keep. I could go on, and I really enjoyed talking with you. You got a lot of really great, enjoyable insights, and I feel a lot of resonance. So I feel like a kindred spirit in this, yeah. And so I'm really enjoying the conversation. But should probably bring it to a close. And
we're both possibility addicts.
Yeah, there's something about that. The possibilities. It's like see the vision of what could be, and how do we get there, and the frustration of how long it takes to kind of get to that vision is. I mean, it seems like, yeah, that's kind of some of the frustrations I have, is like kind of getting traction, wanting something that, I don't feel like I'm getting the traction around it that I would really like to have, or that it kind of needs.
I came up with the phrase possibility addict to describe me in a context where I was helping somebody show what they could do that was really good, and in that situation I had not adequately looked at the situation, and it resulted in tremendous failure and embarrassment on their part and my part and several other people's parts, and everybody else going, what the hell's going on here? And I was so enamored of the possibility that I think I get the hormonal, highs thinking about the possibilities, very much like a drug addict. And I was so high on the possibility that I couldn't see what was actually in front of my face.
Mm-hmm.
And I used that to inform my own thinking about the possibilities, and trying to recognize when that's happening, and to what extent am I personally getting high, to what extent am I actually working to manifest those possibilities? Am I being blinded by the ultimate possibility? So I offer that as a gift. I know we could talk forever about this. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do want to answer that one. My way is doing a lot of empathizing with people. Like I set up the empathy tent, and I really spend a lot of time just hearing where they're at, and that really brings me to that connection of what's going on for people. So, but I still have that vision too. So it's kind of a pull between the two. So,
yeah.
Well, great. Is there anything final piece you would like to cover before we close?
No, I was just thinking Mickey Kashtan's new book has Imagineering tales in it. It has tales of the future that show you how you could actually be living now. And she imagines a movement based on the principles of nonviolent communication, which I read in draft. I haven't read the actual book yet. I have it, but I want to encourage social visionaries like yourself and Mickey in the world of nonviolent communication, empathy, and compassion to think in terms of the systemic implications of what that is, to stay grounded in the personal experience, but expand into the systemic implications both in terms of the vision and in terms of the how we go about trying to create that kind of culture, that kind of society, which sometimes reaches beyond our immediate feelings, like in doing marketing surveys, like in creating stories, whatever. It's like there's a lot of interesting work to be done, and some of us would rather not do that. But we can find people who do, who would. That's
okay,
my final say.
Yeah, okay, Tom, thank you so much for this fascinating dialogue, and I hope we can stay in touch and maybe even have more dialogues go into, if we have on a specific topic, maybe bring Mickey in on it or some others too. So thank you.
Yeah, been fun.